The grand throne room of the Kelthran Empire buzzed with excitement as nobles from across the galaxy gathered for Princess Zara's return. Golden pillars stretched toward the crystal dome ceiling, where 3 suns cast rainbow patterns across the polished floor. Queen Vesa sat upon her throne, carved from a single piece of starstone that glowed with inner light. Her silver robes flowed like liquid metal, and her crown held gems from 100 conquered worlds. "The princess approaches," announced the herald, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. Every eye turned toward the massive doors as they swung open with a deep, resonant hum. Princess Zara walked forward with confident steps, her blue skin shimmering under the sunlight. Her diplomatic robes marked her as a successful negotiator, but something was different today. Behind her walked a figure that made the entire court fall silent. The man was clearly human. His skin was pale compared to the blue-tinted Kelthrans, and he stood shorter than most nobles in the room. He wore simple clothes, dark pants and a clean shirt, nothing like the elaborate garments expected at court. His brown hair was neatly combed, and his green eyes looked calm despite being surrounded by alien royalty. Princess Zara stopped before the throne and bowed respectfully. The human man beside her did the same, though his bow was less formal and more like a polite nod. Queen Vesa leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the strange pair. The silence stretched uncomfortably as hundreds of nobles waited to see what would happen next. "My daughter," the queen said slowly, her voice carrying across the silent chamber. "You have been away for 3 months on a diplomatic mission to the outer colonies. I trust your negotiations were successful." "Yes, mother," Zara replied, straightening up. "The mining colonies have agreed to increase their production quotas, and the border disputes have been resolved peacefully." "Good," Queen Vesa nodded. "But I must ask about your companion." She gestured toward the human. "Who is he?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Every noble in the room held their breath, waiting for an explanation. Some whispered quietly to each other, wondering why a human was standing so close to their princess. Princess Zara looked up at her mother with a calm smile. When she spoke, her words rang clear and strong throughout the throne room. "The man I married." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Gasps echoed from every corner of the chamber. Several nobles stumbled backward in shock. One elderly duke dropped his ceremonial staff, and it clattered loudly on the floor. The sound seemed to break a spell, and suddenly everyone was talking at once. "Impossible. A human? She cannot be serious. This is madness." Queen Vesa raised her hand, and the room fell silent again. Her face showed no emotion, but her knuckles were white as she gripped the arms of her throne. "Explain yourself," she said in a voice as cold as space itself. Zara stepped forward, still holding the human's hand. "Mother, I know this comes as a surprise, but I want you to understand how it happened. 3 weeks ago, during my return journey from the asteroid mining station Alpha 7, our convoy was attacked." The queen's expression softened slightly. She had received reports of pirate activity in that region, but this was the first she had heard of an attack on her daughter's ships. "Continue," Queen Vesa commanded. Zara took a deep breath and began her story. "We were traveling through the Nexus belt when 5 pirate vessels appeared from behind the asteroids. They had been waiting for us, someone must have told them about my diplomatic mission. Our escort consisted of 3 royal cruisers with full military crews, but the pirates had superior numbers and better positioning." The nobles listened intently as Zara described the battle. The pirates had used the asteroid field perfectly, hiding their ships until the last moment before attacking. They disabled the convoy's main engines first, trapping the royal ships in the gravity well of a large asteroid. Captain Corinne fought bravely, Zara continued, but the pirates had planned their attack too well. They boarded our flagship and captured most of my guards within the first hour. I was taken prisoner along with 30 other people, including diplomatic staff and crew members. Queen Vesa's face darkened with anger. "And where were you taken?" "To mining station Alpha 7. The pirates intended to hold us for ransom, demanding not just money but also safe passage through our space and recognition as a legitimate government. They locked us in the station's storage bays while they negotiated. This was worse than the Queen had imagined. Pirates holding her daughter hostage was bad enough, but their demands showed they were more organized and ambitious than typical space raiders. The mining station had been abandoned for several days, Zara explained. Most workers had been evacuated when pirates started threatening the area. But there was one person still there, a human engineer named Tom. She gestured toward the man beside her, and he gave a small wave to the watching nobles. Several of them stared at him with obvious confusion, unable to understand how a human could be relevant to their princess's story. Tom had been working alone to keep the station's basic systems running, Zara continued. When the pirates arrived, he hid in the engineering sections. For 3 days, he watched and planned while the pirates held us prisoner. Queen Vesa studied the human man more carefully. He looked ordinary, nothing special about his appearance or manner. How could such a person have played any significant role in her daughter's rescue? On the 3rd night, Zara said, Tom acted. He had spent days learning the pirates' routines and studying their ships through the station's sensor network. While they slept, he began his plan. The throne room was completely silent now. Even the most arrogant nobles found themselves curious about what a single human could accomplish against 5 ships full of armed pirates. Tom started by sabotaging the pirates' ships, Zara explained. He used his knowledge of engineering to disable their engines and weapons systems without being detected. But he could not do it to all 5 ships at once, he had to work slowly and carefully. Then what happened? Asked Queen Vesa, despite herself becoming interested in the story. The next morning, the pirate leader decided to execute one hostage every hour until our government agreed to their demands. They chose Captain Corinne to be first. Several nobles gasped at this. Captain Corinne was well known throughout the empire, a decorated war hero who had served the royal family for decades. Tom could not let this happen, Zara said, looking at her husband with obvious admiration. He had only disabled 2 of the pirate ships, but he could not wait any longer. So he created a diversion. What kind of diversion? Queen Vesa asked. Tom spoke for the first time since entering the throne room. His voice was clear and confident, though he used simple words that everyone could understand. I overloaded the station's power grid, he said. Not enough to cause permanent damage, but enough to make all the lights flicker and alarms go off. The pirates thought their ships were under attack by a rescue fleet. Zara smiled proudly. While the pirates rushed to their ships in panic, Tom used the confusion to free us. He had memorized the layout of the storage bays and knew exactly where we were being held. He unlocked the doors remotely from the engineering section. This was impressive, the Queen admitted to herself, but hardly enough to overcome 5 ships full of pirates. And then? Then came the really clever part, Zara said. Tom had not just disabled 2 pirate ships, he had also reprogrammed their navigation systems. When the pirates tried to escape what they thought was an attacking fleet, their own computers sent them crashing into asteroids. The throne room erupted in surprised murmurs. Using the pirates' own ships against them was indeed clever, but the Queen still did not understand how this resolved the situation. The remaining 3 ships still had functioning crews, Queen Vesa pointed out. They would have quickly realized what was happening. True, Tom replied. But by then, I had armed the freed prisoners with tools from the maintenance shops. Mining equipment makes effective weapons when used correctly. More importantly, I had convinced them to work together using tactics the pirates would not expect. Zara nodded enthusiastically. Tom organized our people into small teams, each with specific tasks. Instead of fighting like soldiers, we fought like engineers and technicians. We used our knowledge of station systems to trap the pirates in sections where we controlled the lights, air circulation, and gravity. The story was becoming more interesting, Queen Vesa admitted. But she still could not see why this made the human worthy of marrying her daughter. The pirates found themselves fighting in darkness while we used emergency lighting to see, Zara continued. They tried to use their advanced weapons, but Tom had flooded certain sections with harmless but confusing gas from the mining operations. Their sensors could not work properly. Within 6 hours, we had captured or driven off all the remaining pirates, Tom added. The key was not to fight them on their terms, but to make them fight on ours. Queen Vesa considered this. The tactics were indeed unusual, and apparently effective. But there had to be more to the story. This shows resourcefulness, the Queen said carefully. But it does not explain why my daughter chose to marry you. Zara and Tom exchanged a look that spoke of shared understanding. After the battle, we discovered that the pirate leader had planted explosives throughout the station, Zara explained. If their ransom demands were not met within 24 hours, the explosives would destroy the station and everyone on it. The timer had only 3 hours left. Now the Queen understood why the situation had been truly desperate. Even with the pirates defeated, everyone would still die unless the explosives could be disarmed. Tom spent those 3 hours crawling through maintenance shafts and air ducts, locating and disarming each explosive device, Zara said. He worked without rest, knowing that one mistake would destroy us all. When the rescue ships finally arrived, they found us safe because of his courage and skill. The throne room was quiet as nobles absorbed this information. The humans' actions were indeed heroic, but Queen Vesa sensed there was still something missing from the story. I appreciate his heroism, she said formally. But courage alone does not justify marriage between a princess and a commoner of an inferior species. Zara's eyes flashed with anger at her mother's words, but Tom placed a gentle hand on her arm before she could respond. Your Majesty, Tom said respectfully, I understand your concerns. I am human, and by your standards, that makes me inferior. But during those 3 days, I learned something important about your daughter. Which was? Princess Zara never gave up hope, even when the situation seemed impossible. She encouraged the other prisoners, helped care for the wounded, and assisted in planning our escape. When I was disarming the explosives, she insisted on staying close by to help, even though it meant risking her own life if I made a mistake. The Queen listened carefully as Tom continued. More than that, she treated me as an equal from the moment we met. Not as an inferior human, but as someone whose ideas and abilities had value. When I proposed marriage, it was not because I saved her life, but because I had come to love someone who could see past the differences between our species to the person underneath. Princess Zara stepped closer to Tom and took his hand again. Mother, I married him because he showed me what it means to think creatively under pressure. Our empire is vast and powerful, but we often solve problems the same way our ancestors did. Tom showed me that sometimes the best solutions come from approaching problems in completely new ways. Queen Vesa studied the pair carefully. Her daughter's words carried conviction, and the human's actions had indeed been remarkable. But accepting him into the royal family would shock the entire empire. You realize, the Queen said slowly, that many of our people will not understand this union. They will question your judgment and my own for allowing it. I know, Zara replied firmly. But I believe our empire will be stronger for learning what humans can teach us about creative thinking and innovative problem solving. The Queen was quiet for a long moment, considering everything she had heard. Finally, she spoke. Tom of Earth, she said formally, you have shown courage and intelligence in protecting my daughter and her people. However, marriage to a princess requires more than heroism. Are you prepared to face the challenges that come with being part of the royal family? Tom straightened his shoulders and looked directly at the Queen. Your Majesty, I cannot promise to be the prince you expected for your daughter. But I can promise to serve your empire with the same dedication I showed in protecting Princess Zara. If you will allow me the chance to prove my worth, I will not disappoint you. Queen Vesa nodded slowly. The human's words were sincere, and his actions had already proven his value. Perhaps it was time for the empire to learn new ways of thinking. Very well, she announced to the surprised court. I will not immediately reject this marriage. But Tom of Earth must prove himself worthy of his new position. Tomorrow, we will discuss what trials he must face to earn full acceptance as a member of our royal family. The throne room buzzed with excited conversation as nobles debated this unprecedented decision. Princess Zara smiled with relief and squeezed Tom's hand. The first hurdle had been cleared, but both of them knew that greater challenges lay ahead. The next morning brought clouds across the three suns, casting the royal palace in a dim, silver light. Tom stood on the balcony of his guest quarters, looking out at the sprawling city below. Kelthoran architecture was unlike anything on Earth. Buildings grew like crystals from the ground, their surfaces reflecting light in patterns that seemed almost alive. "Nervous?" Princess Zara asked, joining him at the balcony railing. Tom smiled at her. "A little. Your mother did not seem entirely convinced yesterday." "She never shows her true feelings in public," Zara explained. "But I could tell she was impressed by your story. The trials will be your chance to prove that yesterday was not just luck." A soft chime echoed through the room, followed by a voice Tom now recognized as the royal herald. "Prince Tom and Princess Zara are summoned to the council chamber for the trial ceremony." They walked through corridors lined with portraits of Kelthoran rulers from across the centuries. Each painting showed beings with the characteristic blue skin and silver hair of the royal bloodline. Tom realized he would be the first human to join this ancient lineage. The council chamber was smaller than the throne room but no less impressive. A circular table dominated the space, carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light. Around it sat the 12 most powerful nobles in the empire, dukes and duchesses who controlled entire star systems. Queen Vesa entered last, wearing robes of deep purple that marked this as a formal legal proceeding. She took her place at the head of the table and gestured for Tom and Zara to stand before the assembled council. "Members of the High Council," the Queen began, "yesterday my daughter presented us with an unprecedented situation. She has married a human, claiming that his abilities and character make him worthy of joining our royal family." Several council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Duke Merton, an elderly noble with scars from the border wars, spoke first. "Your Majesty, with all respect to Princess Zara's judgment, humans are a primitive species. They have barely achieved faster-than-light travel and their technology is centuries behind our own. How can we accept one of them into the royal bloodline?" Duchess Lyanna, known for her sharp intelligence and sharper tongue, added her concerns. "Beyond the question of species, this human has no political connections, no military experience, and no formal education in governance. What can he possibly offer our empire?" Tom listened carefully to each criticism. They were not wrong about human technological limitations, and he understood their concerns about his background. But he also sensed something else in their words, a genuine desire to protect their empire from making a mistake. Queen Vesa raised her hand for silence. "Your concerns are valid and expected. This is why we have gathered today to establish formal trials. Tom of Earth will face 3 challenges that test the essential qualities of royal leadership: strategic thinking, technological innovation, and diplomatic skill." She turned to address Tom directly. "These trials have been used for centuries to determine whether marriage candidates possess the abilities needed to serve our empire. Many born Kelthorans have failed them. Are you willing to face this challenge?" "I am, Your Majesty," Tom replied without hesitation. "Very well. The first trial will begin immediately." The council members rose and led the group to a different section of the palace. They entered a vast room filled with holographic displays and control stations. Tom recognized it as some kind of command center, though far more advanced than anything on Earth. General Korax, the Empire's military commander, stepped forward to explain the first trial. He was an imposing figure, taller than most Kelthorans and bearing the ceremonial scars of a career warrior. "This is the Strategic Command Simulator," General Korax announced. "You will face a military scenario based on historical battles from our past. Your opponent will be Admiral Thane, our most experienced tactical officer." Admiral Thane nodded politely to Tom. She was younger than the general but carried herself with obvious confidence. Tom could tell from her bearing that she had won many real battles, not just simulated ones. The scenario is the Battle of Nexus Prime, General Corax continued. Admiral Thane will command the rebel fleet that historically defeated our forces in that engagement. You will command the Imperial fleet and attempt to change the outcome. Tom studied the holographic display as it showed two fleets approaching each other in space. The rebel ships were smaller but more maneuverable, while the Imperial fleet had superior firepower and armor. Historically, the rebels had won by using the gravity wells of nearby planets to slingshot around the Imperial formation, attacking from unexpected angles. Standard engagement rules apply, Admiral Thane said. Fleet formations, weapon ranges, and ship capabilities are all historically accurate. You have 10 minutes to study the tactical situation before the simulation begins. Tom spent those minutes carefully examining the fleet compositions and battlefield layout. The Keltheran military doctrine seemed to favor direct confrontation, using superior firepower to overwhelm enemies in straight-up battles. It was effective but predictable. The simulation began with both fleets approaching in traditional formations. Admiral Thane immediately began the historical maneuver, sending her faster ships wide to use the planet's gravity for additional speed and surprise positioning. Instead of trying to intercept these ships or maintain his formation, Tom did something unexpected. He ordered his entire fleet to retreat at maximum speed. "What are you doing?" General Corax asked in surprise. "You cannot win by running away." Tom did not respond immediately, too focused on timing his next move. As Admiral Thane's ships completed their gravity-assisted acceleration and moved to attack his rear formation, Tom suddenly reversed course. But instead of turning to fight, he used his fleet's superior engine power to accelerate directly toward the planet. Admiral Thane quickly realized what was happening and tried to adjust, but it was too late. Tom's fleet used the same gravitational assist that the rebels had planned to use, but in reverse. His ships whipped around the planet at tremendous speed, gaining both velocity and position. When the Imperial fleet emerged from behind the planet, they were moving faster than the rebel ships and attacking from an angle that the historical battle plans had never considered. The engagement was over in minutes. The simulation ended with Admiral Thane's fleet scattered and defeated. The command center was silent as everyone processed what had just happened. "Remarkable," Admiral Thane said finally. "I have run that scenario hundreds of times, and no one has ever thought to use the rebels' own tactic against them." General Corax studied the tactical display with obvious interest. "Your approach violated several principles of traditional fleet engagement, but it was undeniably effective. How did you conceive this strategy?" Tom thought carefully before answering. "On Earth, we have a saying, if you cannot beat them, join them. But I prefer a different version, if you cannot beat their plan, steal their plan." Admiral Thane was using the planet's gravity as a weapon. "I decided to use it as a weapon too, but bigger and faster." The general nodded slowly. "Unconventional, but sound reasoning. You passed the first trial." The second trial took place in the Royal Engineering Laboratory. Chief Technician Vex, a middle-aged Keltheran with cybernetic implants covering half her face, explained the challenge. "You must solve a technological problem that our best engineers have been working on for months," she said. "Our deep space mining operations are being hampered by equipment failures in high-radiation environments. Standard shielding is too heavy for mining equipment, but lighter materials fail within days." She led Tom to a workstation equipped with every advanced tool and material the Empire could provide. Holographic displays showed the failed mining equipment and detailed analyses of the radiation damage. "You have 4 hours to develop a solution," Chief Technician Vex announced. "Our engineering team will evaluate your proposal for practicality and effectiveness." Tom spent the first hour studying the problem. The Keltheran approach had been to develop increasingly sophisticated shielding materials, but each solution created new problems. Better radiation protection meant heavier equipment, which required more powerful engines, which produced more heat, which attracted more radiation. Instead of trying to build better shields, Tom began sketching a completely different approach. He designed a mining system that accepted radiation damage as inevitable but compensated for it in other ways. His solution involved creating modular equipment with easily replaceable parts. Instead of trying to make components that could survive radiation indefinitely, he designed systems that could function even when partially damaged, with automatic replacement of failed modules. "This is interesting," Chief Technician Vex said, examining his designs. "But how do you solve the logistics problem? Constantly shipping replacement parts to deep space mining operations would be extremely expensive." Tom smiled and showed her the second part of his plan. The replacement parts are manufactured on-site using raw materials from the mining operation itself. Each mining station includes automated fabrication equipment that can produce new components as needed. The engineering team gathered around his workstation, studying the detailed specifications. Tom had created a system that turned the mining operation's own output into the materials needed to maintain the equipment. "The beauty of this approach," Tom explained, "is that it gets more efficient over time. As the mining operation produces more raw materials, it becomes easier to maintain the equipment. Eventually, the system becomes almost completely self-sustaining." Chief Technician Vex ran the designs through computer simulations, testing various failure scenarios and operating conditions. After 2 hours of analysis, she announced her verdict. "This solution is not only practical but potentially revolutionary," she said. "It could change how we approach all deep space operations, not just mining." "You passed the second trial." The final trial took place in the Diplomatic Conference Center, where Ambassador Krell waited with a challenging scenario. He was an older Keltheran known throughout the galaxy for his skill at resolving seemingly impossible political situations. "The outer colonies are threatening rebellion," Ambassador Krell explained. 3 separate systems, Taurus, Orion, and Centauri, have each developed grievances against the Imperial government. Traditional diplomacy has failed to resolve their complaints. He activated a holographic display showing detailed information about each colonial system. Tom studied their political structures, economic situations, and specific complaints against the Empire. Taurus system believes their tax burden is unfair compared to other colonies, Ambassador Krell continued. Orion system wants more political autonomy and the right to elect their own governors. Centauri system demands economic independence and the right to trade freely with non-imperial systems. Tom could see why traditional diplomacy had failed. Each system wanted something different, and granting any of their demands would likely encourage similar requests from other colonies. "Your task is to prevent rebellion while maintaining imperial authority," Ambassador Krell said. "You have 6 hours to develop a comprehensive diplomatic solution." Tom spent the first hour talking individually with actors playing the role of each colonial delegation. The Taurus representatives were frustrated with economic policies that seemed to benefit the core worlds at their expense. The Orion delegation felt like their voices were never heard in imperial decision-making. The Centauri negotiators wanted freedom to develop their own economic relationships. Instead of addressing each complaint separately, Tom looked for common underlying concerns. All 3 systems felt disconnected from the imperial government and believed their needs were not understood by distant bureaucrats. Rather than offering specific concessions, Tom proposed a completely new approach to colonial governance. He suggested creating a colonial council with representatives from each system, giving them real authority over issues that affected multiple colonies. This council would not replace imperial authority, Tom explained to the assembled delegations, but it would ensure that colonial voices are heard before policies are implemented. "Think of it as a bridge between the colonies and the Empire." The Taurus delegation was skeptical. "How does this address our tax concerns?" "The Colonial Council would review all tax proposals before implementation," Tom replied. "If they determine that a tax policy unfairly burdens certain systems, they can propose alternatives or request adjustments." The Orion representatives were more interested. Would this council have real power, or would it just be an advisory body? "Real power over colonial affairs," Tom assured them. The Empire would maintain authority over military matters, foreign policy, and interstellar trade regulations, but domestic policies affecting individual colonies would require council approval. Ambassador Krell watched carefully as the colonial delegations discussed this proposal among themselves. Tom had given them something none of them had specifically requested, but which addressed the underlying concerns of all three systems. The Centauri delegation asked the key question: what guarantee do we have that the Empire will honor these agreements? Tom had expected this concern. The Colonial Council will be formally established by imperial law, with its authority clearly defined and protected. But more importantly, this system benefits the Empire as much as the colonies. Better communication and cooperation will make all our systems stronger. After 4 hours of detailed negotiations, all three delegations agreed to the proposal. Ambassador Krell seemed genuinely impressed. In 30 years of diplomatic service, I have rarely seen such an elegant solution to a complex problem, he announced. You found a way to give each party what they truly needed, even though it was not what they originally demanded. You passed the third trial. Queen Vesa and the High Council reconvened that evening to hear the results. Tom stood before them again, but this time he felt more confident. The trials had been challenging, but they had also shown him that human creativity could find solutions that traditional Kelthran approaches might miss. Members of the council, Queen Vesa announced, Tom of Earth has successfully completed all three trials. General Korax reports victory in strategic simulation against our finest military mind. Chief Technician Vex confirms a breakthrough solution to a persistent engineering problem. Ambassador Krell validates a diplomatic approach that resolved a crisis threatening 3 entire star systems. The council members exchanged glances, their earlier skepticism replaced by grudging respect. Duke Merton spoke first. I admit that I underestimated human capabilities. The strategic thinking displayed today was unlike anything in our military doctrine, yet undeniably effective. Duchess Lyanna nodded in agreement. The technological solution showed remarkable creativity. Sometimes the best answer is not to fight a problem, but to work with it. Other council members voiced similar approval. Tom had not just passed the trials, he had exceeded expectations in ways that surprised even themselves. Queen Vesa stood to address Tom directly. You have proven your worth through deed as well as word. Tomorrow, we will hold the formal ceremony to recognize your marriage to Princess Zara and your position as Prince of the Kelthran Empire. As the council session ended, Tom felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. He had earned their respect, but he also sensed that greater challenges lay ahead. The trials had tested his abilities, but real leadership would require applying those abilities to protect and serve an entire empire. Princess Zara took his arm as they walked back to their quarters. I knew you could do it, she said proudly. But I think even I was surprised by how impressed they all seemed. Tom squeezed her hand gently. The real test will come when we face problems that cannot be solved in a few hours with controlled conditions. I hope I can continue to prove worthy of their trust. Neither of them knew that such a test was already approaching, traveling through the darkness between stars toward their peaceful empire. 3 days after the trial ceremony, Tom was still adjusting to his new title as Prince of the Kelthran Empire. The formal recognition had been magnificent. Thousands of nobles from across the galaxy had witnessed Queen Vesa place the royal crown upon his head. But the real adjustment came in learning the daily responsibilities of imperial leadership. Tom sat in his new office, reviewing reports from colonial administrators, when urgent alarms began echoing throughout the palace. The sound was unlike anything he had heard before, a deep, pulsing tone that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. Princess Zara burst through the door, her face pale with concern. Tom, we need to get to the emergency command center immediately. The outer monitoring stations have detected something approaching our territory. They ran through corridors filled with rushing palace staff and military personnel. The emergency command center was a massive underground facility Tom had never seen before. Holographic displays showed tactical information from across the empire, while officers coordinated responses to whatever threat had triggered the alarms. General Korak stood at the Central Command Station, his expression grim as he studied incoming data. When he saw Tom and Zara approaching, he gestured them over urgently. "Your Highnesses, we have a situation that threatens the entire Empire," he announced. "Long-range sensors have detected a fleet approaching from the void regions beyond our borders. The energy signatures match historical records from our archives." Queen Vesa arrived at that moment, flanked by members of the High Council. Her usual calm demeanor was replaced by obvious concern. "General, please brief everyone on the situation," she commanded. General Korax activated a large holographic display showing the edge of Kelthran space. Red indicators marked the positions of approaching ships, dozens of them, moving in perfect formation toward the Empire's outer colonies. "The Void Collective has returned," General Korax announced, and the entire command center fell silent. Tom looked around at the shocked faces surrounding him. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand the significance. What is the Void Collective?" Ambassador Krell stepped forward to explain, his voice heavy with historical weight. 500 years ago, the Void Collective nearly destroyed our civilization. They are a hive-mind species, thousands of individual beings controlled by a single consciousness that spans their entire race. The holographic display shifted to show historical battle footage. Tom watched as strange, dark ships engaged Kelthran forces in space battles that seemed to flow like a deadly dance. "Their technology adapts instantly to any strategy we use against them," General Korax continued. "If we attack from the left, they immediately adjust their defenses and counter-tactics. If we use a specific weapon frequency, they modify their shields before our second shot. Fighting them is like fighting an enemy that knows your next move before you make it." Chief Technician Vex added her technical perspective. "The collective consciousness processes tactical information faster than our computers can calculate responses. They learn from every engagement and share that knowledge instantaneously across their entire fleet." Tom studied the approaching fleet markers on the display. "How did you defeat them before?" Queen Vesa answered with evident pain in her voice. "We didn't. They withdrew after destroying 70% of our military forces and devastating 12 entire star systems. We never knew why they left, but we have spent the last 5 centuries rebuilding and preparing for their return." The tactical situation became clearer as more information arrived from the monitoring stations. The collective fleet was larger than the historical records indicated, suggesting they had continued growing and advancing during their absence. "Current projections show them reaching our outer colonies in 6 days, General Korax reported. "We are mobilizing all available forces, but even with our full fleet, we will be facing superior numbers with inferior tactics." Tom listened as the military leadership outlined their defensive plans. The strategy was sound according to traditional Kelthran doctrine: concentrate forces at strategic points, use superior firepower to break enemy formations, and rely on coordinated fleet movements to maintain tactical advantages. But Tom could see the fundamental problem immediately. Everything they were planning was logical, predictable, and based on established military principles. Against an enemy that could instantly adapt to any logical strategy, such approaches would be suicide. "General Korax," Tom said carefully, "may I ask a question about the historical battles?" "Of course, Your Highness." "In the archives, were there any engagements where the collective seemed confused or delayed in their responses?" General Korax thought for a moment, then accessed the historical databases. After several minutes of searching, he found some relevant information. "There were 3 incidents where the collective appeared to hesitate before responding to our actions," he reported. "In each case, our commanders had made tactical decisions that violated standard military doctrine." Tom leaned forward with interest. "What kinds of decisions?" "Admiral Voss ordered a retreat in the middle of a winning battle. Captain Dana split her forces during an attack instead of concentrating them. Commander Rix used civilian transport ships as assault vessels." General Korax paused. "All 3 officers were court-martialed after the war for incompetent leadership. But their actions caused the collective to hesitate," Tom observed. "What if that wasn't incompetence, but the key to fighting them?" Queen Vesa studied Tom carefully. Explain your thinking. Tom moved to the tactical display and began highlighting different fleet positions. The collective is a hive mind that processes information logically and efficiently. They can predict our responses because we follow established tactical principles. But what if we deliberately acted in ways that make no logical sense? Admiral Thane shook her head. Your Highness, military tactics exist for good reasons. Random actions in battle lead to disaster. Not random, Tom corrected. Unpredictable. There's a difference. Random actions have no purpose, but unpredictable actions can still achieve objectives while confusing an enemy that expects logical behavior. He began sketching formations and movement patterns on the holographic display. What if we organized our fleet based on something the collective could never predict because it has nothing to do with military logic? General Korak studied Tom's preliminary sketches. What do you have in mind? Tom turned to address the entire command center. How many ship captains in our fleet have artistic hobbies, musical training, or creative interests outside of military service? The question surprised everyone. Chief Technician Vex was the first to respond. Many officers pursue creative activities during off-duty time. Captain Soren composes music, Captain Kira paints landscapes, Captain Dex writes poetry. Perfect, Tom said with growing excitement. What if we organized our battle formations based on their art instead of military doctrine? The command center fell silent as everyone tried to understand this unprecedented suggestion. Queen Vesa was the first to speak. You want to base our fleet movements on poetry and paintings? Exactly, Tom replied. The collective can analyze and predict military strategies because they follow logical patterns. But artistic expression is personal, emotional, and often irrational. How can a hive mind predict tactics based on individual creativity? Ambassador Krell looked intrigued despite his obvious concerns. The concept is fascinating, but how would it work in practice? Tom began outlining his plan in more detail. Each ship captain would command their vessel according to their personal artistic vision. Captain Soren might move his ship in patterns that match his musical compositions. Captain Kira could position her forces like elements in one of her paintings. Captain Dex might time his attacks based on the rhythm of his poetry. This is madness, Admiral Thane protested. You cannot coordinate a fleet battle using art as a tactical guide. We wouldn't try to coordinate in the traditional sense, Tom explained. Each captain would receive general objectives, protect this area, attack that target, but they would achieve those objectives using their own creative interpretation rather than standard procedures. General Korax was beginning to see the possibilities. The collective would be analyzing our formations, looking for patterns and logical connections. If there are no logical connections, only artistic ones, they cannot predict our next moves. Tom nodded enthusiastically. Even better, the artistic approach could change during battle. If Captain Soren finishes one musical piece, he can switch to a different composition with completely different patterns. The collective would have to constantly reanalyze our behavior without ever finding consistent logic to predict. Queen Vesa considered this radical proposal. The risk is enormous. If this fails, we lose everything. If traditional tactics fail, we lose everything anyway, Tom pointed out. The collective has already proven they can defeat logical military strategies. We need to try something they cannot predict because it makes no logical sense. Chief Technician Vex raised a practical concern. How do we implement this plan? Our fleet communications and coordination systems are designed for traditional tactical operations. Tom had already thought about this problem. We modify the command structure. Instead of detailed tactical orders, we send each captain a creative prompt, a piece of music, a poem, or an artistic concept. They interpret that prompt as battlefield guidance using their personal creative vision. Over the next 4 days, the entire Kelthran military worked frantically to implement Tom's unconventional strategy. Officers with artistic backgrounds were promoted to command positions. Communication systems were modified to transmit creative content instead of tactical data. Most importantly, ship captains practiced interpreting artistic prompts as battlefield instructions. The results were chaos, but intentional, creative chaos rather than random disorder. Fleet formations looked like abstract sculptures rather than military arrays. Attack patterns followed musical rhythms instead of tactical timing. Defense positions resembled painted landscapes more than strategic fortifications. General Corax admitted privately that watching the practice maneuvers made him nervous. Everything violated his decades of military training. But he also had to admit that the fleet movements were completely unpredictable, even to friendly observers who knew the basic plan. On the 6th day, the Void Collective arrived. Their fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, dark ships arranged in geometric patterns that spoke of cold, calculated intelligence. The collective immediately began scanning Keltheran positions and analyzing defensive arrangements. Tom stood in the command center, watching as the enemy fleet approached their first engagement zone. His heart was racing, but he forced himself to remain calm. Everything depended on the next few hours. All ships, this is Prince Tom, he announced over the fleet communication system. Prepare to implement creative tactics. Remember, you are not soldiers following orders, you are artists creating a masterpiece that no one has ever seen before. The first engagement began when the collective fleet moved to attack the outer defense perimeter. They approached using standard assault formations, clearly expecting the Keltherans to respond with conventional defensive tactics. Instead, they encountered something unprecedented in their long history of warfare. Captain Soren's squadron moved in flowing patterns that matched a complex musical composition, their ships weaving between enemy formations like notes in a symphony. Captain Kira arranged her vessels in defensive positions that recreated one of her abstract paintings, with no apparent logical structure but somehow managing to cover all attack vectors. The collective fleet hesitated. For the first time in recorded history, the hive mind paused to analyze a situation instead of immediately adapting to enemy tactics. Their ships slowed their advance while the collective consciousness tried to process what it was experiencing. They're confused, General Corax reported with amazement. The collective is actually confused. Tom watched the tactical displays as enemy formations faltered. Now we press the advantage. All units, transition to your secondary creative interpretations. Across the battlefield, Keltheran captains switched from their initial artistic concepts to completely different creative visions. Ships that had been moving like musical notes suddenly began positioning themselves like elements in a poem. Vessels arranged in painting-like formations transformed into dance-like movements that followed no military logic but somehow maintained effective combat positioning. The collective's confusion deepened. Every time their hive mind began to identify patterns in Keltheran behavior, those patterns changed to something completely different. The artistic interpretations were not random, each captain was following their personal creative vision, but to an outside observer seeking logical tactical patterns, the changes appeared meaningless. Enemy fleet coordination is breaking down, Admiral Thane reported with obvious disbelief. Individual collective ships are trying to adapt to different artistic patterns simultaneously, but there's no overall logic for them to follow. The battle continued for 8 hours, with Keltheran forces maintaining their artistic approach throughout. As enemy ships tried to adapt to musical patterns, they were attacked by vessels following poetic rhythms. When they adjusted to painting-like formations, they encountered ships moving in dance-inspired patterns. By the end of the engagement, the mighty Void collective fleet was in complete disarray. Ships collided with each other as different parts of the hive mind tried to implement contradictory adaptations. Their perfect coordination collapsed into confused chaos as the collective consciousness overloaded trying to process too many unpredictable variables simultaneously. The collective fleet is retreating, General Corax announced to cheers throughout the command center. They're withdrawing to the outer system. But Tom was not ready to celebrate yet. We need to make sure they don't regroup and adapt to our strategy. All ships, prepare for pursuit using completely new artistic interpretations. The chase that followed became legendary in Kelthran military history. For 3 days, the fleet pursued the collective forces using constantly changing artistic tactics that prevented the hive mind from establishing any predictable patterns to analyze. Captain Dex began timing his attacks based on ancient war poems from Earth literature that Tom had shared with him. Captain Kira reorganized her squadron formations to match famous paintings from human art history. Captain Soren composed entirely new musical pieces during battle, using the rhythm of combat itself as inspiration for his ship movements. The collective, faced with tactical patterns based on alien artistic traditions they had never encountered, finally admitted defeat. Their fleet withdrew beyond the borders of Kelthran space, leaving behind a message that would puzzle Imperial scholars for generations, unable to process creative chaos. Withdrawal required to maintain collective stability. When the victory celebration began, Tom found himself surrounded by grateful nobles and military officers who could barely believe what had happened. The impossible had been achieved. Humanity's greatest weakness, their tendency toward unpredictable and illogical behavior, had become the key to defeating an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. Queen Vesa approached Tom during the celebration, her expression mixing pride, gratitude, and amazement. "Prince Tom, I owe you an apology. When my daughter first brought you to court, I saw only a primitive human who had gotten lucky during a pirate attack." She paused to look around at the celebrating crowd. "Now I understand what Zara saw in you. Humans possess something we Kelthrans lost long ago in our pursuit of logical perfection, the ability to think creatively under pressure, to find solutions that exist outside the boundaries of conventional wisdom." Tom took her hands respectfully. "Your Majesty, the victory belongs to your people. The captains who trusted an impossible plan, the crews who followed artistic inspiration into battle, the officers who abandoned everything they were trained to believe about warfare. I simply offered a different perspective." "You offered more than perspective," Queen Vesa replied. "You offered hope when we faced certain defeat, and creativity when logic had failed us. The collective called your tactics creative chaos, and they were right. Chaos can be a force for good when guided by human imagination and courage." Princess Zara joined them, her face glowing with pride and love. "I told you he was special, Mother." Queen Vesa smiled at her daughter, then addressed the celebrating crowd. "Citizens of the Kelthran Empire, today we learned that strength comes in many forms. Our new prince has taught us that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through superior force or advanced technology, but through the simple human ability to think differently when everyone else has given up." The celebration continued through the night, but Tom found himself thinking about the future. The collective had been defeated, but the galaxy was vast and full of other challenges. The Empire would need to learn how to balance their logical, ordered approach to problems with the creative chaos that humans brought to difficult situations. As he watched Kelthran officers discussing new tactical theories based on artistic principles, Tom realized that this victory was just the beginning. Two species had found a way to combine their strengths, creating something greater than either could achieve alone. The question asked by Queen Vesa 3 weeks ago, "Who is he?" had been answered in the most dramatic way possible. Tom was not just the human who had married a princess. He was the bridge between two different ways of thinking, the catalyst that would help an ancient empire discover new possibilities for growth and creativity. Standing beside Princess Zara as the 3 sons of the Kelthran homeworld painted the sky in brilliant colors, Tom looked forward to whatever challenges the future might bring. Together, they would face them with both the wisdom of ages and the fresh perspective that comes from seeing old problems through new eyes.